Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering your Arizona Cardinals. And with me is Seth Cox, my co-host from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation. He's also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. And guys, you know, if you haven't been in on the podcast, it is that time of year. One, Cardinals are bad. Two, it's the end of the college season. We're getting the bowl games, and so we're going to start getting a ton of analysis and breakdowns of players and positions and conferences. And that, if you haven't jumped on yet, you should do that now for sure to get ready for the off season. We're in episode 491. This is the first of our two preview shows. This is our Week 13 Cardinals-Steelers preview, picks, and prop bets. So, Seth, are you ready for? I don't know. I don't know. This game, it feels like a Browns game vibe leading up to the game. I don't know. It's still only Thursday, so we don't know what the final injury report's going to look like. But there's a part of me that thinks, ooh, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because we love to give our prop picks, and they've added some more since in the last 2 hours since I last looked, which is good. But before, so 2 hours ago, and we're recording at a 4 p.m. on a Thursday. 2 hours ago, there were no Arizona Cardinal props available. Now there are a few now. It's not as plentiful as normal, but we do now have some Kyler Murray props, only touchdowns and interceptions, no yardage yet. We do have zero, at least on DraftKings, zero Cardinals receiving props. And we do have Kyler Murray and James Conner rushing props, but only for yardage and longest rush. So there's very, very little right now in terms of offensive player props in the Cardinals side of things. And I mean, it makes sense. You come into this game and you just mentioned it. It's a very, is negative the right word? I'm not sure. There's a very eerie feeling of what to expect when you look at the fact that Vegas doesn't even know what to do with this game.
It's you're listening. If you've been listening to the show all season, Seth and I don't really and never have really bought into the notion that this is a team actively trying to lose or to be not good. It was the game last week was the first one where I thought maybe I've been wrong, and I don't know how you tank other than organizationally. Okay, from the top down, you just don't get players. There's so many things that don't make sense, but it is feeling like they're not trying to, or they're trying their best not to put their best players out unless they're absolutely 100%. And the fun news of the day was Zach Ertz requesting to be released, and they're like, okay, you can be released. As he saw while he was injured, he basically saw his job disappear as Trey McBride took over that tight end position. So yeah, Zach Ertz or the
this is semi-breaking news within the last hour. McBride just was upgraded to limited today.
Yeah, so it looks like he's on track. So the DNP for both Jalen Thompson and Trey McBride on Wednesday appear to be, the super precaution, kind of like what they did with Hollywood last week. And they're doing again this week. They did yesterday as well. They had the heel issue Thursday, Friday. He still played, but then it's heel issue on Wednesday. I haven't seen the injury report quite yet. I just got home.
He's DNP as is Michael Wilson. That explains some of the props coming back, but not much of the props coming in. And we obviously are looking at this from a slant of, previewing the Steelers, but also trying to have some fun with it, because in a season like this,
might as well make some money, right?
Right.
Try to.
Right. And so this is a situation this week where there's just not a whole lot. And the fact that, so let me ask you this, because obviously we'll get into the nitty gritty of everything, but like, is the line stagnant at 5.5 give you a weird feeling too? Like, why is this line staying stagnant so much?
Oh, I think part of it is the fact, because it actually started at 6.5 and dropped Tuesday to 5.5 and it hasn't moved since then. And I think what that is honestly, it's less about the Cardinals and more about they still don't believe in the Steelers offense.
Yeah. So you look at it, you've got a Steelers team that put up their first 400-yard game offensively.
And only scored 16 points.
Yeah, in 44 games.
Yes.
So the previous 44 games, they had not had over 400 yards of offense from scrimmage. This coincided, of course, with their first game with out Matt Canada as their offensive coordinator. So that was, one of those situations that you look at and you say, oh, okay, is it a causation, correlation, or just a fluke? For reference, the Cardinals' last 400-yard game was this season in week 3. So it's not a situation that you look at and you go, well, the Cardinals haven't done it. I mean, literally the Cardinals did it in week 3 with Josh Dobbs as their quarterback.
Yeah, against the Dallas Cowboys team.
Right.
That
is one of the best in the NFL right now.
Yes.
And so they have been hideous offensively for a number of games, going back obviously 2 years under Matt Canada. And a lot of that coincides with Kenny Pickett. He's just not a great quarterback. I talked to let me make sure I get this gentleman's name right. He was kind enough to respond to me. He's got 2 last names, so it throws me off. Or 2 first names, however you want to look at it. But I talked to Jarrett Bailey of Behind the Steel Curtain, and that's kind of what we talked about. Like,
oh, I know Jarrett Bailey writes the power rankings for Touchdown Wire too.
Oh, okay, yeah, very nice guy, great guy to speak with. You and I touched on this earlier this week. You look at Mike Tomlin's 17 seasons as a head coach. He's never had a losing record. I don't want to jinx it, but seems fairly certain he once again will not have a losing record this year. Now he's been 500 a number of times, I think 3 total. But I talked to Jared about that, and I said, you got to be impressed. Like, is he just the most underrated coach in the NFL? And it's like, he's respected, but the fact is he hasn't won a playoff game in 7 years.
Yeah.
And I look at that and I go, okay, well, I mean, do you want to be the Steelers or do you want to, and I'm not going to say that they're the Cardinals, but do you want to be the Bengals or one of these other teams that because remember that was kind of the Lovie Smith thing. Like, are you going to get Sean McVay or are you going to get, one of the other coaches that fails spectacularly, Brandon Staley, Robert Saleh, these guys that everybody thinks are the next hot young thing, and they just don't end up working. And so, I think as Cardinals fans, we would take 17 winning seasons or non-losing seasons, all these playoff appearances, and we'd be like, well, I get it. They haven't won a playoff game since 2016, but, at the same time, they've been to the playoffs twice they've missed out on
the mix, and they're in the mix. That's it.
Right. Every year.
That's also something that's important. I know there's you got to expect more. We want more. But honestly, as a fan, really the best thing, like the ideal thing you can have for fan interest, and I know it's not necessarily for building your organization. Like, you either need to fall into but in terms of fan base and being a fan, it's more fun when your team is relevant down the stretch. So even if you're not a great team, you have something that you're looking forward to with the possibility of the postseason. So if at least it's that. I know that sort of mentality is what leads to years and years of not in the playoffs, or years and years of just being pretty good. But that's really still, that's a good thing to have as a fan base, rather than just being awful, hoping it gets better, and then every once in a while being great. I don't know. I don't know what the better option is.
Right. And so you look at it. So we talked about, their 28th scoring offense. You even kind of alluded to it. They hit their average. First 400-yard game in over 2 years, and they hit their average. They scored 16 points. That's what they do. They score 16 and a half points a game. And that's 28th, but they only allow 18.6 points per game. So, you look
Which
at
is,
it.
Again, you look at that statistically, they're a 7-14 with a negative point differential, a top 5 scoring defense, and yet they have a negative point differential this season. It's right. An oddity. Kenny Pickett, sorry, probably just a second. I shouldn't do that on the microphone. Kenny Pickett, in his second season, he is spectacularly unspectacular, right? If you look at his last 6 games, 1 touchdown pass, 0 interceptions. I mean, 0 interceptions is great, but 1 touchdown pass in the last 6 games. He does do things well late in games, like when they need him, but you're like, what is he? That's like, what quarterback is he? And I know part of it, as you guys will hear on my preview with Mark Bergen of the Enemy Preview, is no one knows what Kenny Pickett is, because was it Matt Canada? They've got a scapegoat now, so now you've got to see if Pickett is more than what he is, or if he is just like
a guy, yeah.
And not even that, but because is he beginning to be washed up Andy Dalton?
Well, and you look at it, I mean, you mentioned it, 6 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. He has now the franchise record. This is super interesting to me. The franchise record for most consecutive passes without an interception thrown. So what that tells me is this is a guy that doesn't take any chances. And like you said, is that the scheme? Is it like, hey, don't lose the game for us?
That's probably what being beat into him, like, especially when you've got a defense, you're like, just don't turn it over.
Well, let me go a step further. Outside of last week, and then in their 24-17 win over the Los Angeles Rams over a month ago, 10-22, so it looks like about 6 weeks ago, sandwiched in those next 4 games, not like 2, not 3, 4 games, this guy went out and put up less than 500 yards passing in 4 games. He had games of 73 yards, 160 yards, 126 yards, and 106 yards. And he had 1 touchdown pass. By the way, guess what their record was in those 4 games? They went 2-2. Oh. So there's nothing you can look at and say that makes sense. It was kind of like, what we talked about a couple weeks ago with shucks, who the Cardinals play a couple of weeks ago? The Texans, where you're like, nothing they're doing makes sense, and they just somehow win games, and then they pulled out a miracle against the Cardinals, and maybe that's a strong thing, but there was a bunch of errors that led to them beating the Cardinals, right? And so you look at that and you go, okay, well, what about the Steelers? And and you just look at it and you're like, I mean, obviously their defense is good, but before last week, they were kind of bad in yards. I mean, they were giving up 20, or they were 26th in yards allowed per game. They were 28th, or excuse me, 24th in passing yards allowed, 22nd in rushing yards allowed. Like, those are not good numbers. Those aren't like, oh, look, but they're 5th in scoring defense.
Yeah.
They're 3rd in turnovers. And by the way, they're 1st in turnovers against, and they've turned the ball over the least amount of anybody in the NFL. They have a plus 11 turnover differential. So that makes up for a lot of it, right? They force basically a turnover every game. But until the last 2 games against the Bengals, when, with Jake Browning, and then the Cleveland Browns, I believe DTR started that game. I could be wrong. I'm just double checking myself right now. But before that, they had not allowed less than 335 yards in a game. They hadn't allowed less than 335 yards in a game. And by the way, in most of those games, they won. So again, like, there's stuff, everything you look at doesn't make sense. I mean, the loss to Cleveland, right? That you're like, oh, that makes sense. They only had 259 or 249 yards from scrimmage, so that's obviously the game that caused Matt Canada to get fired. But I mean, they only allowed 259 yards from scrimmage. But like before that, their win over the Ravens, they only had 289 yards of offense, but they forced 3 turnovers. Mm-hmm. Their win over the Cleveland Browns, when Cleveland was, kind of healthy, they gave up 408 yards of offense. They won this game. They only had 250 yards of offense, but they caused 4 turnovers. so the way that they do things doesn't make sense. They allow yards outside of TJ Watt. They don't get to the quarterback a ton, right? I mean, TJ Watt obviously is just a phenom, 13.5 sacks on the season, but their next highest guy is 4.5. Like, the next guy on the list is 4.5. Marcus Golden is 3rd on this team in sacks. Like, so everything about them just doesn't make a lick of sense. But they're 7-4. They find ways to win games. They find ways to wear teams down. But I mean, you look at it, the Cardinals have as many sacks, same amount of sacks as the Steelers on the season. Like, it's just stuff like that doesn't make a lick of sense.
They do have playmaking though, and and they run the ball quite well. They look at the Najee Harris is 598 yards, averaging 4.2 carry. That's solid. He has not been the spectacular back that everyone hoped he would be, and perhaps Cardinals fans should be glad that, because Najee was one of those guys that was probably going to be the pick for the Cardinals in that draft. If it weren't for that was Zaven's year, right?
Yeah.
And had it not been Zaven, it was probably going to be Najee, and he's been spectacularly unspectacular. He's a grinder, but and then they got Jalen Warren, who's averaging 5.8 per carry, 542 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And so between the two of them, they have nearly 1,200 yards rushing, and just through the first 11 games for them. And based on the way that the Cardinals, and we'll wait for that to the next segment. But then you got Kenny Pickens, 16.6 yards per catch. Deontay Johnson.
George Pickens.
Who did I say?
Kenny, which is
that's a mix of the quarterback and the receiver.
Yeah.
Wow.
but
George Pickens, Kenny Pickett, and then they just barely, and we're gonna see if this is gonna continue. They just got Pat Freiermuth involved in the offense. He's got 18 catches on the year, but wasn't it just 9 catches last week?
Yeah, he's been hurt, but I mean before that, he's only played in 6 games, but there's zero doubt, and this isn't even a fantasy football type of conversation. He had 11 targets last week. The week before he was healthy, he had 1 target. He missed the 5 previous games of that, but you go back and the last time he was healthy, 10-1 against Houston, he had 4 targets. Against Vegas, 4 targets. Against Cleveland the first game, 1 target. Against San Francisco, 4 targets. And you're talking about a guy that, was drafted in the 2nd round, that was looked at as a guy that could be an incredible, offensive weapon. And he's not even the most disappointing one. They have Deontay Johnson, who, I mean, with all intents and purposes, was supposed to be the next guy in that lineage of Steelers receivers that just create incredible numbers without much fanfare, right? And you look at it in 2021, this guy put up 107 catches for over 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. And by the way, that was I believe Big Ben's last year.
It
was.
was.
And then they draft Kenny Pickett, and this guy just completely nosedives. Last year, he still put up 86 catches for 882 yards, but Jess and I had as many touchdowns. He had 0.
And those are tight end type. Those are running back receiving yard in terms of like yards per catch.
Right.
That's like running back stuff.
And then this year, he's obviously missed some time, only played in 7 games, and he was off to a great start this year. I mean, just a fantastic start. You look at his first 4 games played, he missed a plethora in between, but 3 catches, 48 yards. Then he missed the next 3 weeks, or maybe even 4, and he put up 5 for 79. Then he played again. He put up 8 for 85. Then he played again on a short week, put up 7 for 90. And then from there, he is bottomed out. And again, maybe this coincides with Canada, but even last week, which was his bounce back, was only 4 for 50. But I mean,
and dropped what would have been a touchdown catch.
Yeah, and he had 3 in the last 2 games before the game against Cincy. He had 3 catches for 33 yards. Like, we're talking about a guy who was billed and was on pace to be one of the better receivers in the NFL, and all of a sudden he's just, I mean, this is a guy that has 30 catches for 385 yards and 1 touchdown. Like, it's been hugely disappointing. And so you have the obvious concern that we'll get to, and that's that this is the week that these guys get right.
That's what we always seen. Defensively, they've got TJ Watt, who's a game wrecker. 13 and a half sacks, 25 quarterback hits, 12 tackles for loss. He's got 3 forced fumbles, 6 pass breakups, an interception. He can do it all. He might be the best defender in the NFL right now. And I wouldn't say there's anyone better. They've got a good young cornerback in Joey Porter Jr. Patrick Peterson has not looked good this year. The very good safety in Minka Fitzpatrick, but has been dealing with injuries this season, played only 7 games, and we'll have to wait and see what his game status is going to be. But yeah, they've got corners that you can challenge, but the Cardinals might not have. When we get the Cardinals might not have receivers to challenge those corners with.
Right. And let me ask you this: if you're the Steelers, does it make sense to get Minka back this week and ease him in, or knowing that it's likely a semi-easy game, comparatively speaking, do you wait another week and get him another week healthier? Like, where would your mind be as the Steelers?
I guess it would depend on how close he is.
Yeah, because I mean, it's just like this is the first week he's practiced. Like you said, I think he's missed the last 4 games. Obviously, he brings a complete, like, he is having him in the back end along with Watt in the front end is literally just completely game changing. I mean, you're talking about a guy in Minkah Fitzpatrick who is still second on the team in tackles. He hasn't played for 4 games and he's still second on the team in tackles. He is just a star. And like you said, Joey Porter Jr. has looked good. Levi Wallace has been really good out of the slot for them. So they've got some guys, but they just, I mean, again, and then this week happened, so who knows? But the last 2 weeks have happened, but like they just haven't looked very good defensively in terms of stopping opponents. They force turnovers inside the red zone. They get takeaways at clutch times. They don't allow touchdowns. And I guess all of that's way more important in the end, right? But you have to assume eventually it catches up with you.
Yeah.
Don't you? I mean,
it makes sense. Once you hit a certain team, and that's not going to work now.
Right. And that's what that was my next point, is not this week, obviously. But
no, probably not. Probably not. Coming up next on the Rise Up Zero podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk. Let's talk about the matchups. More preview. So what are keys? What are matchups for the Cardinals in Week 13 against the Steelers? That's coming up next on Rise Up Zero. We're back on the Rise Up Zero podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the web. Let's talk about the Cardinals and Steelers this time. There's obviously some matchups, and part of this is made difficult because we don't know who's going to play. But I think if there was one thing, I think obviously don't turn the ball over. They can't do that against the Steelers and have a chance, because that's how the Steelers win games. But after what we saw last week, they must, no matter what, they must commit to running the ball with James Conner, with Michael Carter, with Emari Demercado, whether it takes all 3 of those guys. They can't give up on the run, because if they don't run the ball, their pass game isn't good enough. It's with who they have catching passes and the how the passing game has looked, you can't just pass the ball. They allow 4.3 yards per carry. They allow almost 120 yards per game on the ground. The only way the Cardinals will have a chance in this game is if they can keep close and rely on Connor to kind of keep them on schedule. He's a good enough back. The Steelers aren't as good against the run as they should be for a team that's supposedly a great defense. But we saw the problems that the Cardinals had in pass protection last week when the Rams weren't even like blitzing. If you're only passing the ball against that team, Kyler's going to get hit. Kyler's going to get fumbled. Kyler might get hurt. I don't know. It's just I think that is key number 1. Commit to and maintain running the ball with James Conner. This might be I think this is the game you bust out the 25 carries for him.
Yeah, it needs to be, and it needs to be one of those things where you kind of lean on the run game, and like you said, you've got 2 backs, maybe 3 backs with Demercado. You have Kyler Murray. You got to run the ball against this team, and the reason why is because the thing that they do best is they create turnovers. I mean, you've got Levi Wallace with two interceptions. You have DeMonte Casey with 2. You have Joey Porter Jr. with 1. You have Shandon Sullivan. You have Alex Highsmith. I mean, the list of guys that have one interception on this team is crazy. I mean, they have 12 interceptions on the season already. And so when you look at it, the fact that they have the best pass rusher, maybe the best defensive player in the game, and TJ Watt, as you spoke about earlier, the fact that they have guys like Alex Highsmith and Quan Alexander that force fumbles, on top of what Watt does, forcing fumbles. And then they have guys that are opportunistic with making plays on the ball. In the guys I just mentioned, all of that is like, hey, run the football, play action pass. You have opportunities for shots, but like if you don't have Hollywood and Michael Wilson, you're relying on Greg Dortch and Rondell Moore, and nothing against those guys, good wide receivers. It's just undermanned in the sense of there's two guys that are probably wide receiver 3 types at best, and so you need to be able to utilize the talent you have in the best way you can. If McBride's there, it'll be interesting because they do a nice job on tight ends most of the time, but obviously they've got Trenton Thompson, who's stepped up a little bit in the absence of Minka. They have Joey Porter Jr., who you mentioned, but Quan Alexander and Landon Roberts do a nice job dropping into coverage on tight ends, and they're good at that. So those are things that you want to look at and kind of avoid if you can. So we'll see, man, because I think it's hard to break down their defense against this offense with just the unknowns. But the one focus you have to have is TJ Watt, right? Like how can you stop TJ Watt from getting to the passer? And the reality is the answer is no, right? I mean, you're not going to stop him. So how do you lessen his impact?
That matchup's going to be really interesting because it's Paris. It's Paris Johnson because he lines up almost every time. They don't move him around a lot. They put him over right tackle, and so we will get to see perhaps the best in the game against one of the best young prospect tackles in the game, and it'll be interesting to see because Paris he had a little rough game, but he's the past couple of weeks since Kyler took over, he has been better, at least in pass protect. Like there's a lot of promise there, but we'll wait and see.
But let's also be honest. The last couple of weeks we've seen Paris and Will step up from a pass pro standpoint, and while Yelda Froholt and you and I at left guard have really struggled at pass pro, and then obviously DJ's been struggling. So Alex Highsmith is one to watch as well, right? Like I said, he's only got 3 sacks, 3.5, 4 sacks on the season, whatever it is. But I mean, last year I think he had like 12 sacks. He had a pretty big season last year, if I remember right. He's got 4.5, this season. But last year he had 14.5, so I undersold him. So I mean, he's a guy that can play off the game wrecker and TJ Watt, and those are the matchups to watch when they're on offense right now, because we just don't know anything. Like I said, Joey Porter Jr. has been excellent. Can you take advantage of Patrick Peterson? Those are questions that we can ask, but I don't know with the guys that they have.
One of the key players that we're going to have to watch this matchup is their running game, the Steelers running game against Josh Woods. I mean, Josh Woods leading the way at linebacker instead of Kaiser White. The first game he took over, and it was a disaster. It's not that Woods played poorly, but the defense was terrible.
Yeah, bad.
228 rushing yards. They've given up big games to running backs. Obviously, the Kyron Williams last week had 143 rushing yards. He had 158 against them before. They gave up over 100 to Christian McCaffrey, over 100 to Tony Pollard. Bijan Robinson had a big game against them. And so the run game, and then that's what the Steelers do. And so, yeah.
Right. And they have a brutal offensive line. I mean, outside of James Daniels and rookie Broderick Jones, their offensive line has been pretty bad this year.
Their starting center's Mason Cole. Who knew?
Yeah. Cole's there. you know, I think Jones just kind of got into the lineup.
He replaced Okorafor,
Chuck,
right?
Yeah, Chukwuma Okorafor. So he was playing left tackle, and he was fine. Not good, not bad, fine. And then they benched him, and then they replaced Chukwuma Okorafor. Dan Moore is their left tackle. He's been kind of dreadful until last week. He had an okay game, but before that, he's been kind of bad. Mason Cole's been bad. Isaac Somolo hasn't been great. Like I said, James Daniels and then the rookie Broderick Jones have kind of been the bright spots along that line. So, unfortunately, the Cardinals probably just don't have the horses up front to take advantage of that. I mean,
Kevin Strong coming back will help, but
yeah, it's rough, and that's something we've talked about 100 times. We don't need to beat that dead horse too much. Can they contain Najee Harris and Jalen Warren? Najee's, picked up the pace the last couple games. You kind of went over the stats earlier, but they're going to feed him. That's what they do still, and it's part of the reason they're so successful, right? Is because when you shorten the amount of possessions, when you shorten the game time, it helps. So you look at his last 4 games, 4.5 yards, 5 yards. He had a bad game against Cleveland, but I mean Cleveland's really good. And then he kind of had a really good game last week against Cincy, 15 carries, 99 yards and a touchdown. So you look at it, the 3 of the last 4 games, he's been 70 plus yards and a touchdown. And that was against Tennessee, Green Bay, and Cincy. Again, I probably take the Cleveland game out of it. If you want to throw it in there, then understand that you're wrong, because the Cardinals defense is nowhere near the Browns defense in terms of. And then you look at that with Jalen Warren. I mean, 11 in his last 4 games, 11 for 88, 15 for 101, 9 for 129 against Cleveland. And then he was a little bit on the struggle bus last week, 13 for 49, no touchdowns. But again, are the Cardinals even the Bengals level of defense?
No, they're not. Not right now. No, certainly not.
And so you have to think that that's where it's going to be. We went over it. I mean, Pickens is their best receiver. He's a matchup problem with his size and speed and skill set. He's a very talented player, kind of enigmatic in his behavior, but he's only 22. Last year as a rookie had 801 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's on pace for more this year. He's already got 662 and 3. But he's been, since about week against the Rams, so I don't remember what week that was, he's been quiet. 22, -1 yards, 45, 38, 58, those last 6 games. Yes, you're right. You heard that correctly. -1 yards in a game. Kind of baffling to even think that's plausible for a guy
right.
that didn't get hurt. I mean, if a guy catches the ball, gets hurt, that's one thing, but like to not get hurt, to have 5 targets, 2 receptions, and -1 yards in today's NFL. Yeah. So, but before that, he had 107, 130, and 127 in games. Are we, like, what is your expectation? Is that going to be plausible this week against this, this bad Cardinals defense, or do you think that it's just going to be mostly Najee and Jalen?
I think it's mostly going to be Najee and Warren, because why else would he do anything else? So that was like last week. And so, like, you might see Kenny Pickens, you might see him throw 2 touchdowns and no interceptions, but I don't think any receiver is going to light them up, because they don't think they'll need to, and I don't think they're because the Steelers don't actively they if they've got a lead, they don't try to like kill you. They just like, hey, we're just going to kill the clock. And that's the weird thing. So, yeah. Coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to our picks and props. That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour Cardinals talk on the web. This is your favorite segment. We make our predictions. We give our picks. And we talk about prop bets. All the prop bets were bad last week. Well, a couple of them were pretty good. We didn't have much. Well, actually, Seth was good. Mine was not. Like I had a couple hits from what I wrote, but my personal one, I went 0 for 5 on. Like I struck out last week on all three of my underdog picks, both the pop props that I put money on last weekend. It was bad. That was not a good weekend. But let's start with the props. It's interesting because I wrote the best bets for this week. I don't know where it went. James Conner had yardage earlier today. It was 54.5, and so I said take the over. That I think if that one comes back, I don't know if it's because
it's back on DraftKings at 52.5. So even better to what Jess is saying.
Yeah. But let me see if we get. Oh, there is James Conner. It is 52.5. So, interesting because it's earlier today it was 54.5 at -115. I like this even better. Over 52.5 at -110. Now, with Conner, with the way that Pittsburgh defends the run, Conner's going back home. This is a game where when you see the alternate rushing lines, shoot for 75. That's probably going to give you some plus odds. I'll probably have that on mine, on my best prop bets this weekend when I write it for CardsWire. But I'd be shooting. So right now, definitely over 52, and then I would stack that with a alternate line of 75 or more, and because you'll probably get it at about plus 120, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and it's not available yet on mine either, so keep an eye out for it. Let me ask you this. We just talked about receiving props or receivers in this game. Does 47.5 for Deontay Johnson or 43.5 for George Pickens entice you? Or are you, with what Nakua and Kupp were not having to do last week, are you just kind of staying away from it?
I'm staying away from that right now.
The one I do like right now that I'm looking at plus 100, Pat Freiermuth over 3.5 catches. It's not going to be 9 again, but I think he can get 4 against this Cardinals defense. Tyler Higbee had 2 touchdown receptions.
Yes.
And I think Freiermuth's a better player. So, that's one to look at. The other one that I do like is George Pickens over 19.5 for his longest reception.
I was just going to say that one.
Yeah. So
they'll hit one of those, especially. Yeah. Marco's going to have to play, isn't he?
I mean, with Starling Thomas likely out, yeah.
Like, who else is going to play? I mean, you've got right now, Ham's not ready. Thomas didn't look like he was going to be able to play. And so you've got Keitrell, you've got Garrett Williams, and then Marco Wilson, unless they're going to bring up if it's Devod Wilson again, or... I still don't know what a Devod Wilson is.
Right, exactly. So let me ask you this then on that topic. Last week we saw Matthew Stafford go 25 for 33. So 33 attempts. The Rams, generally do throw the ball quite a bit.
Yes.
And so 33 is
20,
actually not
28.5.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Do you 20? Well, that's his completions. His attempts are 28.5.
Yeah, I'm like,
would that
I'd be surprised if it's over that.
In the under? I was going to say in the under.
Actually, that one's not a bad bet, especially unless the Cardinals absolutely sell out against the run, which I don't think they can do because they're bad on the pass defense.
Yeah, so in 11 games this year, he's only hit the over 5 times. He's under 28.5 6 times. Obviously, only the one game without Canada, but he hit 33 in that game. But again, they didn't run the ball quite as well in that game.
Here's one, and it is simply because of the law of averages. Interceptions. You can get Kenny Pickett at over 0.5, so basically half an interception at plus 120. I think, not because I think the Cardinals are going to, I think he's due an interception, right? He's gone 6 games without it, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. And the Cardinals have been okay at getting takeaways. You've got Jalen Thompson with interceptions in each of the last 2 weeks. Buda can do it. And so that one's not a bad one to throw a little bit of money at, is over half an interception for Pickett at plus 120. That's one you can play a little bit with.
My favorite plus money bet on the day is Alex Highsmith over 0.25 sacks, so 0.25. So if he gets a half a sack, that's at plus 110. I love that bet. I think that he is going to have a good day. The other one, the TJ Watt one's not worth the juice, but if you like free money, it's probably fine. But his is 0.75, so he has to get a full sack on the day. That's minus 150, but I really like Highsmith, and then Cam Hayward's at 0.25 at plus 120 as well. Both of those I would feel confident and comfortable going with that, just because, like we've mentioned, DJ Humphries has not been good this year, and then you have the fact that that Yelda Froholt and Carter O'Donnell, and maybe it's Elijah Wilkinson, because it can always get.
That's right. It felt like, because Wilkinson got hurt in week 7, but he got hurt, and Gannon revealed the week later that Cologne had taken all the snaps. So it was Wilkinson got hurt after he was benched. That's what it seemed like. So they replaced him with Cologne, who then got hurt, and then replaced him with O'Donnell, who was replaced by Cologne last week. I don't know if that was just to give him work. So maybe they're like, okay, I guess Wilkinson's the best option.
Yeah, so both Highsmith and Hayward, they line up on that defensive right side. I think those are good plus money bets. That's where I would go. I would stay away from anything Kyler Murray related, unless you want to take his over in rushing yards, but I just don't like the juice. I've told you guys before, over 29.5 is kind of where anything under that, I'll take 24.5. But once you get to 30, because of sacks, kneel downs, things like of that nature, I stay away from it.
Here's winning margin. I like winning margin here because it's interesting, because Steelers 1 to 6 points plus 290, and Steelers 7 to 12 at plus 400. So I don't think that they're going to win by significantly more than that. And, well, honestly, if you want to play a little bit, because I think you can still average plus money if you put 3 wagers on the Steelers 1 to 6 is plus 290. Steelers 7 to 12 plus 400, and then by 13 to 18 is plus 475. I think if I had to pick, I think it's going to be in the 7 to 12 range, which is one's a nice one at plus 400. But in fact, ignore the Steelers 1 to 6. I don't think the Cardinals can even cover this game.
The funny thing is, again, Jarrett Bailey of Behind Steel Curtain and apparently Touchdown Wire, he thinks the Cardinals cover, which
I don't know.
Every victory has been within 7 points for the Steelers this year. Wow. Every single one.
And spoiler alert, I have a 7-point win for the Steelers.
But also, as Jess always says, law of averages. So they got to go one way or the other eventually.
So so if you like the Steelers 7 to 12, it's plus 400.
Yeah, and if you do like that 13 to 18, if you want to get frisky, it's actually better odds on DraftKings. The 1 to 6 and 7 to 12 is better on BetMGM. On DraftKings, it's plus 550.
Ooh.
So if you
You can ladder your bets, but across platforms.
yeah, and that's one of those. You mentioned it, like you bet 10 on the 1 to 6. You bet 7.5 on the 7 to 12, and then you bet 5 on the 13 to 18, and that's how you make sure you make some money, because it's $22.50 in that, and then you end up, your lowest win will cover that. So that's the way you do that. And then if they win by 19 to 24, you call and complain to Jess and I.
But that would, yeah. All right, time for our predictions. So we've got our prop bets. Let's go with the predictions. I was a little bit wishy-washy yesterday, like 13 to no. I think this is going to be a 20 to 13 game, but I don't think it will be a 2013 game that's even that close. I think it'll be probably 20 to 6. And the Cardinals pick up a garbage time touchdown.
Okay, I was going to go that they do cover, and take the under.
Oh yeah.
I think both of us are on this under, but I'm going to go 21-17.
Oh.
With the same theory that it's 21 to 10, and they get a late touchdown.
And it's a late cover. Oh.
Yeah. Unless Gannon decides to go for 2 or something crazy.
Oh.
And
which they'll fail, because they're no good.
Right.
They're so bad on 4th down and on 2-point conversions this year. It's insane. Like just don't do that.
But unfortunately, like we said, there's not a lot of Cardinals props right now, but there are props to bet against the Cardinals, and hey, that's the way we made all that money last week. Matthew Stafford over 1.5 touchdowns, and laddering the Kyren Williams. And by the way, if you would have laddered Kyren Williams up to 125 plus yards, that was plus 2,100. So I was smart enough to do that on my own, because I knew that this was going to be a nightmare scenario for the Cardinals. So
drinks on Seth. Seth.
A $10 bet was turned into $220. So
that's nice. All right, we'll wrap up this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This is dropping on a Friday. Saturday we will have our preview, our enemy preview, opponent preview with Mark Bergen from the Believe in Steelers podcast. But Seth and I will be back again on Tuesday night, which you will hear on Wednesday, talking Cardinals-Steelers, and then probably it'll be the only one we do that week, because the Cardinals can't lose against the bye. There's that, at least. That's Seth Cox. Exactly. I'm Jess Roots. Thanks for listening, as always. Talk to you again soon. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating, and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Roll!